They were asked how peace will be brought to the Middle East, and Romney said the usual kind of rubbish. He said, which was bad enough, mind you, the Palestinians, he said, will have to want peace as the Israelis so clearly do. To show their desire for peace, they have to stop sending, quote, thousands of rockets from Gaza into Israel every day. And also they have to stop using, quote, school books that teach how to kill Jews. But Gingrich went further. The reporter asked, it was Wolf Blitzer, by the way, in case you don't. He was asked to comment on this notorious claim that he had made that the Palestinians are an invented people. And this is what he said, and I really invite you to listen for it if you like humor. Black humor. Technically, he said, there was an invention in the late 1970s. I swear, I wrote this down from the thing, because prior to that, they were Arabs. And many of them were either Syrians, Lebanese, Egyptians, or Jordanians. I swear, this is what he said. It's amazing. But anyway, I'm not going to go on with that because you all know this particular kind of story. Which brings me to Gene Sharp, which you pulled the rug out from under my feet with that one. But also, this is from the BBC website. This is the story of the man who was described on the BBC website, the man now credited with the strategy behind the toppling of the Egyptian government. And it goes on about how you were all sitting in Maidan al-Tahrir at night with flashlights reading his book. Are you not aware that you were doing that? I don't know where this came from, and I know I've been reading it for some time, since the thing began. But how this has happened, how it has been legitimized, is there something to it? I don't know. There is. Oh, okay. Well, that's good. So it's not the entire. No, it's a ton of money. Oh, okay. But you know, he was being interviewed recently on Hard Talk on the BBC, and I started to watch it, and then I simply couldn't bear it, and I do what I so often do. I just switched him out. So I don't want to steal all of this. Now I want to tell you that I don't want to steal the Egyptian story or the Tunisian story, but I feel as a half Irene and as someone who has shared this experience, then I need to say a few things about this and to point out some of the dangers of self-narration. I have felt since I've been here, and certainly in the last 2 days and even more before that there's some talk about this revolution as though it were sui generis, as though it came out of nowhere, as though there was no antecedent to it. And I'm very concerned about, there's been no mention, for instance, hardly any mention of the first revolution of 1952. And I don't understand quite why, but it's as though that's something everybody wants to put out of their minds, and I'm not sure we can or should. There's been hardly any mention of Tunis. For me, the great, I mean, of course, Rafa talked about it in her opening, and there's been some talk, I'm not saying there was no talk, but for me, the great shock was the departure of Ben Ali, before the departure of Mubarak, because the Ben Ali thing was so shocking, wonderfully shocking, to say that people were able to get rid of this tyrant. I couldn't believe it at first. I thought it was absolutely magnificent. So when Mubarak happened, it was, sorry, but you were Act 2. And it was wonderful, of course, but still there was a kind of thing. So another thing is, the concentration has been really on Maidan al-Tahrir. I have heard nothing about Suez or Alexandria or Hamza or any of the other places, and I don't know whether that's pure Cairene chauvinism or what, but I feel that there's a problem there for me. There's been no mention of some of the great moments of the past when we were able to raise our heads as Arabs. The great moments of modern history, I'm not talking about the past, I'm talking about recent, fairly recent history, probably before many of you were born. 1956, Algeria, the first Algerian, Al-Ubur, for a time Egyptians were talking about nothing but the Ubur, but then it faded into sort of anti-history or something. I want to talk a moment about South Lebanon, because I think that what's happened in South Lebanon is extraordinary, and I think I just need to take just a minute, maybe even if I don't. The 2000 liberation, the liberation of South Lebanon in 2000, I don't know how many of you remember it, but for me it was also a massive event. There was an army, the Israeli army, in occupation for 30 years, or however much it was. Brutal occupation, massive occupation, with the planes going over our heads every day. And then there was a liberation. The first time Arabs were able to liberate land, forcing the Israelis out. Not through humiliating negotiations, but directly. Get out, and they got out. So that's one thing. And the second thing was the 2006 war, in which this marvelous liberation, I don't know what you want to call it. I mean, of course, it depends on which side you're on in Lebanon. Of course, this is spoiled for us by the divisions in Lebanon, by the very bitter and nasty divisions. Dr. Lubna Yusuf, in the beginning of this whole conference, asked us to stand up for a moment's silence. And I was terribly, terribly moved by that. And I was telling my friend Nahwan, we never did that in Lebanon for all the people who have died, because so much division that you can't really savor that moment. But something about language, I want to just say very quickly something about the last speech, and that is capital T, capital L, capital S. The first one of Ben Ali, which was of course reproduced then by Mubarak, and then by Gaddafi, and then by the law. But Ben Ali wrote the template, I guess, of this. The patriarchal, you are my children, you are my brothers and sisters, you are my... And think of all the things I've done for you over the years, and you should be very grateful. Of course, Gaddafi, to do him justice, wasn't patriarchal. He said, you're rats and cockroaches. But still, he took credit. Well, you remember the Zanka speech. I just want to compare it very quickly, because my time is entirely up, and because I'm talking about language. To compare that with the speech of Nasrallah, please don't think of me as a Hezbollah propagandist, because I'm certainly not, but just something that I've been thinking about as we're talking about language. Compare those speeches with the speech of Nasrallah during the 2006 war, when he addressed his people, that is the people in the south of Lebanon. You've had martyrs here, and you know what that's like, of course. You have to think about Lebanon with total destruction. I mean, if you went down to the south after the war, you would see a total destruction, total landscape of it. I mean, hardly a house standing, and even in the suburbs of Beirut. So this man addresses his people, and he says, Ya Ashraf al-Nas, Ya Athar al-Nas, and then goes on to tell them, I kiss your feet, and so on, and you're the ones who did this. I mean, I think this is a very interesting sort of contrast in language, in the way of a leader addresses his people. And then in 2000 as well, he talked about Sha'b al-Libnani, you are the ones who did this liberation, not me. And there's an interesting footnote to something that Zina Sawaf and her group yesterday were talking about youth and so on. Very interesting, but very quickly, so that I'll close with this. Perhaps a bit humorous and perhaps not so humorous, but the business of dyeing the hair. You remember Mubarak, of course. There was a bit of a film about that, by the way, which was terrific, and I recommend it to you, showing the whole business of dyeing the hair in Photoshop, arranging the picture so that he was in front of Obama instead of, all of those things. Ben Ali was visibly dyeing his hair as well, right? And so was Gaddafi. I think the interesting thing is that Nasrallah, who was a young man, and I'm not going to reproduce all the arguments you made yesterday about youth and old men and the father of the nation and all of this, but this is this young man who's in his 40s now, I think, who had a black beard and black hair and so on, and now has white hair and white beard and doesn't dye it. And I think there's something there, but that's for another paper. Thank you.